A new Trackmania season is upon us with the release of the Summer 24 campaign, and that means, of course, yet another seasonal ranking video. As always in these videos, I'll be rating every single track on the +2- rating scale, which if you are not familiar with, goes from a triple plus to a triple minus, with the triple plus being the best and a triple minus being the worst. I will also be ranking every single tracks against past tracks of the same number. For example, here we have Winter 2401, which I thought was the 12th best track #1 released, compared to Fall 23's, which I thought was the 13th best. Last season, I also introduced a new track strength qualifier, which is really just there to show that all tracks are not created equal, even within their own colored series. For examples, track #1's I have generally found to be rather weak compared to track #5's, so a track 5 that I rated in 10th place doesn't necessarily equal a track 1 that also got 10th place. But we are finally done with that introduction here and the information I need to give you, so let's start it out here with track #1 and the White series. Like I said previously, track #1's are generally pretty weak, and that goes for this track as well, as it falls in the bottom half of my rankings here at number 10, which is 2 spots lower than last season, which also did not have a lot going on in that one, but this one even less so. A small jump to open, a long right-hand turn, followed by pretty much a straight line to the finish. Generally, a very boring track. It's not bad, but there's really nothing noteworthy about it. So track #2 I generally found to be a good track, but it's also a very frustrating track, so it doesn't result in the greatest ranking here, but it's still 5 spots above last season's here, falling at spot number 7, and it generally just comes down to the gearing here. Like, you want to get gear 5 right before the grass part, but even if you do get that gear up, it seems like more likely than not you're just going to automatically lose that gear up anyway, drop down to 4 again. So yeah, if they gave you a little bit more space, if it was a little bit more calculated, I feel like I would have enjoyed this one much more. Track #3 is a very interesting case here, because we have a track that is sort of a copy of an older track, and that older track is Summer 2103, which also happens to be my favorite track #3 ever made. So with that, you're probably wondering how this track ranks at number 8 for me and the other one ranks at number 1, and that's because they generally just made the track way wider, and they also made it 8 seconds longer. So therefore, the track is just way less action-packed, at least in my opinion, and therefore I found it a bit more boring. I thought track #4 was generally a solid track, but the end of it for me kind of missed the mark, as it felt a little bit out of place and didn't really fit the theming of the rest of the track, because the rest of the track is a lot of focus on tech, as well as a pretty high-speed plastic looping part, but at the end you get this weird penalty sand no-slide part, which I feel they could have easily replaced with a tech turn into the same exact kind of straight into the ending, and it would have fit the track much better. And here we are with track #5, and unfortunately, just like the previous 2 tracks, this one fell right in the middle of my rankings, once again at spot number 8, and I just didn't really find this track to be all that exciting, with a couple of long drawn-out turns, and with only a couple of drifts. At least compared to other track #5's, there's just not all that much action going on with this one, and don't get me wrong, I do think this is a good track, but I feel it could have been much better placed, maybe at a track 3 or 4 at the latest. Now, before I go over the graph we see before us here, I want to go over very quickly on how these scores are calculated. Because there are 17 seasons and therefore 17 tracks per number, my #1 rated track will get 17 points and my least favorite will get 1 point. Those 17 points times the 5 tracks gives us a total out of 85. Also, in seasons past, I had no tiebreakers, and that is no longer the case, and it's a very simple concept as well, because there are 5 tracks in a series. If one season has 3 tracks rated higher than the other season, it will win the tiebreaker. And that will come directly into play here, as we see the Summer 24 season just edges out last season's Spring 24 season with the same 49 points. This tiebreaker puts it into 6th place, which is really not all that bad of a position. It's still pretty far away from the best scoring series, but it's also pretty far away from the worst as well, and it really just goes to show that if they avoid just getting super bad tracks into the campaign, a series can still perform very well with just average ones. And that's really not to say that these tracks were average, they are in my rankings, but they have a lot of other tracks to compete with, and they're just not the best of the best, but they're still good tracks overall, and I thought the white series of tracks were pretty solid. But that is enough for the white series. Let's move on to the green series. As far as track number 6 goes, I do think this is a good track, but it's not my personal favorite, and I also don't think it's close to even the top track 6 has ever made, and that results in it being my 9th best rated one, and it really just comes down to all the jumps on the track, whether it be the bigger ones or the smaller ones that are in the middle of the route, especially this one here where you got to get a nose down, a pretty big nose down as well, and it feels almost a little bit random on whether or not you get it, so I found that part in particular to be the most annoying part of this track. Being completely honest with you, I think track number 7 is the worst track of the entire campaign, but even with that said, this one doesn't really rank that terribly despite that, falling at spot number 12, which puts it in a tie with 2 other tracks in this campaign. But yeah, a blind jump into a plastic wall bounce back into an ice slide, a lot of things can really go wrong with that, and then I found the gearing at the end of the track to be a little bit suspect as well, and yeah, I just really did not enjoy this track. I'm really not sure what to say about track number 8 because for the position this track is in, it's very basic. A couple of longer straight sections in between a couple of minor turns, and that's basically it. I'd say the only thing that really needs to be changed about this track would be the start. Not really sure why the decision was made to have you jump short there and hit the very edge of the rounded landing piece. But yeah, that's the only questionable part of this track. But in my opinion, this is too basic for a track number 8. I have some very high praise for track number 9. It's the first track that is rated higher than a plus for me so far. It's also getting a rank number 2 out of the track number 9s, which is extremely impressive, considering I find track number 9s to be the strongest out of the green series. You have to have a very good track in order to rate that highly. And going back to track number 8, you can see the stark difference between these 2 tracks and just how much more action-packed and how much more fun this track is compared to track number 8. So yeah, I have very high praise for this track, very fun, very enjoyable, and an extremely good one. And here we are with the final green series track with track number 10, and like the previous couple of seasons with the snow and rally car, we have another car switching track, this time of course with the desert car, and I found this track to be more fun than the previous 2. Maybe it's because I have a slight bias towards higher speed or full speed style tracks, so that could certainly help it in that regard. I still didn't find it to be the most exciting track in the world, not a ton going on with it, but not a bad track nonetheless. Looking at the green series of tracks, we can see the Summer 24 season scoring 51 points and losing the tiebreaker unfortunately to Spring 22 and Winter 23. So 8th place, at least it's above average here. Again, it's a bit unfortunate that it did not win any of the tiebreakers, because if it won both of them, it would have put it into 6th place, and the difference between 6th and 8th seems like a pretty big leap when it's really not. At least it did handily beat out last season's, which only scored 43 points, so 8 points higher there, and we are trending up in terms of track quality, at least in the green series, because this is the highest rated in the last 6 seasons, again, losing that tiebreaker to Winter 23. Though even despite that upward trend in the green series track quality, I do think it is still pretty lacking, as this is the first time since the fall 23 season I rated a green track even in the top 5, so it's been quite some time since that, and I do think the green tracks need a quality boost. But that'll do it for the green series. Let's move on to the blue series. Track number 11, we have a bobsleigh track here, and I always say, I can take or leave bobsleigh. I don't really care for the surface all that much. Sometimes there can be good bobsleigh tracks, but for the most part, they're pretty middle of the road. This one, though, I did find things on this one that I just did not like, including the water bounce into the penalty sand part, where you can skip over the penalty sand if you get a weird water bounce. And I also did not care for the end on this one. We got the bobsleigh into a grass, wall ride sort of section. Just felt a little bit out of place, feel like it didn't work all that great, and yeah, this is kind of just another mid bobsleigh track. Track number 12 is an interesting one because I do think this was a good track when I first played it, and I still think it is a good track, but as far as track number 12 goes and the Blue Series in general, I think it's just sort of a weak track for that colored series. I feel like if maybe track number 10 was not a car switching track these days, this would have been perfectly fit in that position, but maybe because of that, they had to bump it down into the Blue Series, and for the Blue Series, again, I just think this is a weak submission. So with that said, this one did not rank the best here at spot number 12, and again, I do think this is a good track, it is just not in the right position. As far as track number 13 goes, it has extremely similar vibes to a track from exactly 1 year ago with Summer 2313, and both of these tracks I also found to be pretty darn good, but they both suffer from the exact same things with the plastic bounce ending. I'm not sure why they have made this decision, not only on these tracks, but they've done it on a few other tracks as well, and I really honestly could go without them. They add a bit of randomness to the track that I just don't really care for personally, but still I found this to be a good track nonetheless. It is my second highest rated and ranked so far, falling at number 4 and getting a ++ respectively. I found track number 14 to be yet another very enjoyable track here, getting a first place ranking out of the track 14s as well as another triple+ rating. Yeah, even though I typically don't enjoy the triple lap tracks that they have made in the past, I found this one to be very well done and actually well thought out. I feel like past ones that they usually try to go for usually involve a very basic lap, and then they just want to make the track longer, so then they just make it a triple lap, and it ends up just being very boring. But that's not the case on this one. We have a variety of different surfaces, a variety of different turns, and all that together makes a very enjoyable track. And here we are with track number 15, the final Blue Series track, and it's pretty much the first non-trivial track for the Desert Car, unlike track 1s and 8s, for example. The track itself is alright, but for me, I've been finding the Desert Car less enjoyable the more I drive it. I'll go more into detail on that at the end of the video, but for this track in general, the plastic sections especially, I found them to be even less enjoyable than the any other parts of this track or any parts of any other track with the Desert Car, as it just slides out way too easily. Like, the difference between keeping grip and not keeping grip is so minimal. It's very frustrating and very annoying. Now, looking at the chart for the Blue Series, we can see the Summer 24 season here didn't fare the best, but also didn't fare the worst, as it fell at rank number 9 for me, so right in the middle. Certainly, if you like Desert Car more, this rank could be higher, as well as if you like Bobsleigh more, it also could be higher in that regard. As far as the tracks in general go, 13 and 14 were extremely good tracks, but unfortunately, they were kind of offset by the other three, falling basically at slightly below average ranks. And then we have kind of the outlier of track 12, which again, I do think was a good track, but really it's just in the wrong series. Put this as a late green track, and that would have helped out a series that was also in much of need of a better track. As far as the Blue Series in general, I do notice a trend of some extremely good blue tracks being made, so hopefully they can continue that trend, and hopefully more than the 2 or maybe 3 good tracks we are getting in this series, hopefully they can extend that to every single track. But that is it for the Blue Series. Let's move on to the Red Series. Track 16 is really starting us out in the Red Series on a great note, as I thought this was the second best Track 16 ever made, as well as giving this one a triple+ rating. I just found this one extremely addicting to drive. There's lots of little tricks that you can perform to try to improve your time here. So yeah, I just found it very fun, which is generally not the case for me on these off-road tracks. They've tried many of the penalty sand and penalty grass style tracks, and they just haven't worked out well in my opinion. But this one worked out extremely well. It's a very fun track to drive, and yeah, one of the better ones ever made. I really don't know how to explain my feelings towards Track 17, because on one hand, it looks and it seems like it drives kind of well, but for me personally, every single time I drove this track, I just did not enjoy my experience on it. The overall vibes of the track just felt off. It just felt just weird overall to drive this track. Again, I really don't know how to explain what is off about this one, but again, every single time I drove this, I just did not have a fun time driving it. So I don't know, it's not the worst track ever made. I'm giving it just a slightly below average ranking, and I'm still giving it a plus, but something about this one I just do not care for, and that's just the way it is. In terms of the more complex desert card tracks such as 15 and 25, I think track 18 is probably the most forgiving of these tracks, as there's just less ability to slide out on this one due to the surfaces used on the track, because I don't think there is any off-road surfaces on this one like grass, dirt, or plastic, but there are still a couple of rather sharp turns that you can still slide out on, but I do still think this one is again more forgiving than those other two. Even with that said though, this one did not fare the best in my rankings, getting spot 12, so not the best there. Again, I just don't care for the desert car all that much anymore. I still think this is a good track nonetheless, and still gave it a plus. Track number 19 brings us right back up to the top, as I thought this was the best track number 19 ever made. However, I did not give this one a triple plus rating, instead a plus plus, and the reason for this is the seemingly deliberate effort on this track to consistently block out the player's vision on a large majority of the turns. And things obstructing your vision is probably one of my biggest pet peeves in this game, so the seemingly deliberate choice in order to do that made this track a little less enjoyable for me, and it made the choice to rank this number 1 even harder than it probably should have been, because honestly, without that, this probably would be one of the best tracks ever made from any season for any track number. And just like we started the Red Series here, we'll be ending the Red Series on a great note as well, with track number 20 getting ranked number 2 and yet another triple plus rating. I feel like I've been practically begging for the last few seasons for something to be done with the wood surface that was something other than like 180-degree hairpin turns or wet wood, which was by far the most overused aspect of the surface. So finally, this season, we get something vastly different. It's still a fairly fast style of wood, but then you got these like sharp turns onto the grass surface. In order to keep a lot of speed there, you got to get really good exits. It's a very fun style to try to drive and perfect, so I give him credit for finally doing something different here with the wood. It's a very nice track. As for the scores for the Red Series, we can see the Summer 24 season here scoring a very respectable 62 points, which puts it in 4th place. So obviously, 4th place is a pretty good position to be, and it's only 3 spots away from a possible 2nd place finish here, which could easily have come from track number 17, which again, I just didn't care for. It was a good track, just something felt off about it. And track 18, a desert car track, very hard to compare against a stadium car track, especially since I just don't like the car as much. Also, comparing this season to last season, we had a massive jump up in score, 41 points to 62, so a 21-point boost there. That is a bit in part due to the last season having 2 rally card tracks, one of which was a rally ice track, which definitely hurt the score a lot there, but still 3 extremely good tracks in this series nonetheless, so hope to see that trend continue into the future, but that'll do it for the Red Series. Let's move on to the Black Series. And just like the Red Series, the Black Series is going to start us out with another extremely good track, with track number 21 being another number 1 ranked track as well as a triple plus track. Now, when I first started to drive this one, I really didn't enjoy it all that much, in all honesty, because it did require a fair amount of precision in order to drive this one cleanly, but the more I drove it, the more I started to like it. It still does require an annoying amount of that precision to drive, especially on the 2 wall jumps in the track, which is a bit of my main complaint about it, especially the one at the start, because at the start you have a jump where you need a massive nose down, and that is immediately followed by one of those wall jumps, and if you don't get either one of those, you gotta just keep restarting, and it turns the track into a bit of a restart simulator. So that is, probably the most annoying aspect of this track, but nonetheless, it is a very good one. I honestly don't have a ton to say about track number 22. It's a pretty typical full speed track, and that's basically there is all to say about it. It's got your basic wall ride part, it's got all the speed sliding. Obviously, the most thing that stands out about this one is the author medal was made to be rather challenging, at least compared to plenty of past campaigns. Need some pretty good speed slides here in order to get that author medal, and that is one of my complaints, not only about this track, other tracks in this campaign, and just the consistency of author medals in general I think could be a little bit better. I don't mind if they're difficult, I just wish they were consistently the same difficulty instead of having some that are extremely easy and some that are extremely hard. Just make them all one way and it would be far less confusing. I found track number 23 to be a rather unique, rather fun, and also just a great track in general, and I feel like this is the first time in quite some time that we've had an engine off track for basically the whole track. I think the last one I can remember was back in like winter 23. It was a sausage engine off track, maybe like 18 or 19 in that campaign. It was a fun track as well, so I'm glad to see the style coming back. It can be also a rather frustrating track, if you're not great at tech like me. If you get bad drifts or crash at all on this one, you're going to lose a massive amount of time, so I can see that not being fun for people who are not the greatest at it, but yeah, I found this one to be a rather good track. I honestly have no idea what to talk about for track number 24 and have no idea how I'm going to try to fill out a minute of time talking about this one, because the track itself is very mundane, very boring. What's there even to say about it? There's not a single section to me that stands out on this one. The track is just kind of there and very forgettable. And I just don't want to completely shit on this track because I do think it is a good track overall, and it did even fall in the top half of my rankings, so it's not terrible. Just comparing it to everything else, even going back to the red tracks and maybe even some of the blue tracks, it's just a rather boring submission, at least in my opinion. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this one. It's unfortunate because, again, it is a good track. It's just got nothing going for it. And here we are with track 25, the final track of the campaign, and maybe the most infamous track of all time for how hard the author medal time is on this one. As of now, only about 600 players have this one, and I kind of doubt by the end of the season that 1,000 players will have it unless there is a massive final week push. Now, other than this probably being the hardest author medal of all time in terms of the campaigns at least, the route itself on this one I really felt could have taken a page from last season's Track 25, which gave the player a lot more room to navigate, made the track a lot more fun to actually drive, because on this one, there's so many sections where there's basically no room for error, otherwise you're going to slide out or tip over. And in my opinion, this is just made worse by the fact that there's so many damn checkpoints on this track. I don't know why it needed so many. Like, there's 20 checkpoints on a 70-second track, so a checkpoint every 3.5 seconds, which is just absolutely insane. You cannot practice anything because no matter what, you're gonna hit a checkpoint in the middle of a turn. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say about track number 25. It's an okay track for what it is, but certainly could have been better. Now, looking at the scores for the Black Series, we can see the Summer 24 season actually did pretty well here, scoring 58 points, which puts it in 5th place. Now, this was another series that had some pretty good tracks, with Track 21 and Track 24 getting 1st and 4th respectively, but they were a little bit offset by 3 kind of average tracks, but still, those average tracks still kind of keep you in those top positions, because as long as, again, you avoid disastrous scoring tracks, you can still score pretty good and have an overall solid series of tracks. The bad news for this season is that we did take a step back from last season, which scored 67 points, so going to be pretty hard to top that anytime soon with future campaigns, but still, a 5th place here for Summer 24 is not all too bad. Now, looking at the scores for the entire season, we can see Summer 24 scoring 272 points, putting it in 5th place against every other campaign. This is an excellent spot to be in, and it's only 3 points away from a 4th place finish, and it is a decent step up from last season's Spring 24, which scored 259 points, so a 13-point gain. Now, really, in my opinion, I think the best way they can improve their score here is just through the White and Green series. Like everything else, Blue through Black had some very standout tracks and also some average tracks, which is kind of all you need. But in the White and Green series, there was only one track rated pretty highly, and that was track number 9 in 2nd place. Everything else I rated 7th through 12th. Now, can this actually happen? I'm not quite sure, because I feel like this downtrend in quality of those tracks really came about when they started only going free to play in those first 10 tracks, so they had to make them a little bit more easier and more accessible to those free to play players. So overall, a very solid season here for the Summer 24 campaign, and honestly, this is the first time in quite some time that I actually want to go back and grind some of these tracks for better PBs. Now, other than the campaign, I do want to talk about the new cars now that all 3 of them are out, at least the ones we know they are working on and have announced. Really, the desert car is the first time I enjoyed a car less the more I drove it. And it basically just comes down to the tipping mechanic on the car, and the difference between actually, not tipping over and fully tipping over is so minimal. And if you do tip over, you go from probably hundreds of speed down to 0 pretty much instantaneously. I feel like the best way I can really explain my frustrations for the way the desert car drives is comparing it to what a similar scenario for a tech track would be for the stadium car. Like, imagine you're going for a drift and you just overdrift a tiny bit, but then suddenly the stadium car just goes flying off the track because of that. I think that shows, kind of how tedious the car would be to drive and how unfun it would be. As far as the other cars go, obviously Stadium is going to be my favorite car, but of the new ones, the Snow car is probably my favorite of the 3 new ones, followed by Rally and then Desert. But that is all for today's video. Pretty sure I went over everything I needed to. Job well done on the Summer 24 season. I'm excited to see what comes in the future based on the trends we have been seeing. But thank you all so much for watching today. If you have not done so already, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any videos in the future. Again, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all here in a couple of months with Fall 24.